Whoa, this is the basic character modding tutorial. So you may see some things here already. This is working under the assumption that you have already watched the setting up a basic modding setup tutorial from Bones. Anyways, there are a couple things here that I will explain. The first is ResourceLoader. This is a separate class from your main class. You have the main class here, the one that you created in the previous video, and then you have ResourceLoader. ResourceLoader should be somewhere underneath it. You can copy ResourceLoader off the modding wiki or off this doc, but it's very important. This is how we get images into the mod. After this, you may notice this. This is how you set up a mod description and a menu icon, perhaps, using album for your mod. You can copy this bit here. The important parts is this. This is the mod name. This is the mod description. Like, just normally you would say other things than this. Like, this is a mod. Contents. And then this is the menu icon. So in ResourceLoader, you put ResourceLoader load sprite, and then you would put the name of the sprite, and the sprite comes from over here. You need to make sure that it is set as an embedded resource, and to get images here, you can go to project, add existing item, and then add anything you want from your folders. So next, I will show how to make a character. So the first thing you want to do is create a void add. And then you want to, inside that void, I'm going to copy a couple things over and explain them. So to start the character creation process, you want to do something like this. This line here, this creates a new character. This here, this line, sets the name of the character, so I have it set to this. You can change it to things like that. This is the health color. You can set the health color to purple, blue, gray, yellow, red, green if you wanted to. I would not recommend using split pigments because I'm not entirely sure if there are sprites for that within Brutal API and it may break things. But most characters have a purple health color. This is the entity ID. Each entity ID for each character needs to be different. If there's any overlap, one of them may not load. So generally, we would recommend using 5 to 6 digits and then just putting in random numbers to make sure it doesn't overlap. Then you have these. This is where you set the sprites. You need to set the overworld sprite, the front combat sprite, the back combat sprite, the menu locked sprite, and the menu unlocked sprite. The menu sprites need to be 32 by 48 pixels. Yeah, 32 by 48 pixels. Generally speaking, the locked sprite is just a monochrome version of the menu sprite with white outlines and black interiors. However, since there is currently not a way to lock characters and unlock them with quests, the only way you can lock your characters is through a bug in Brutal API. It is not necessary to create a separate lock character sprite. The combat sprites are 64 by 64 pixels, and then the overworld sprite is also 64 by 64, but usually what people do is they take the menu sprite and then simply expand the canvas. Though, technically speaking, you can use any sprite size for the overworld sprite. You will notice that the overworld sprite has a couple extra things here that the other sprites do not have. And these are important. These set the position and the size of the sprite. 32 pixels by unit here means that the sprite is small. If you do not set this, you will end up with a significantly larger sprite. The next thing to add would be these bits here. So what these do, this dictates whether or not the character shows up in the menu. This dictates whether or not it is a support or offense character by the selection bias. This dictates whether or not it walks in the overworld. If you set this to false, the character will teleport, sort of like how Gospel or Leviat move. And this dictates whether or not they can appear in shops. For instance, Mordrake has this set to false. Next you have hurt, death, and dialogue sounds. You can use enemy sounds or character sound through the methods of loaded assets handler, get enemy, and then you would put the internal name of the enemy, or get character, and the internal name of the character. There is a spreadsheet of all of the internal names of the characters and enemies that you can find. And then you would put the dot damage sound, dot death sound. And for dialogue sound, characters have a dot dx sound, which is the equivalent of the dialogue sound. But enemies do not have that, so if you wish to use the enemy sound for the dialogue sounds, you'll have to use either the damage or death sound, and you'll just have to make do. You can, technically speaking, use any sound for any of these sounds. The next thing to add would be the amount of levels. So, by default, this is 4, since most characters only have 4 levels. However, you can change this to 1, for instance. Gospel has 1 level. Doll and Mordrake clones have 1 level. You could set this to more than 4. You could set this to like 5, 10. I would not recommend it, because then you'd have to make separate abilities for each level, and that can be tedious. You can, for the purpose of this tutorial video, I will set them to 3, simply because I do not want to have to make 4 separate levels. The next thing I will teach you how to do is extra sprites. Actually, no, that's a bit complex. Yeah, I'll make the base ability. So, just copy this over. To create an ability, you make a new ability. You give it a name, description. For cost, you do new mana color, the number of pigments, and then inside the exact pigments you want to use. For instance, I have this currently set to 1 yellow pigment, but you could do 1 yellow, 1 blue. I'd have to change this to 2, or I guess that's not necessary. You can do 3 pigments. You can do, I think, up to 6 pigments, and you can just keep going like that. I'm gonna have it for 1 yellow. You would set the sprite of the ability. Ability sprites are 48 by 48. Then you would set the effects by doing .effects equals new effect 2. And then you can do stuff for the actual effects. You do effect 0 equals new effect. You do the effect you want to do via script.logic.create instance, and then the actual effect. For now, I'm going to do a damage effect. And then we'll make this damage 1 to 2. This is what it does. This is the amount of what it does, the entry variable, for instance, because this is 2. This effect will do 2 damage. This is the intent type. You can set the intent type to things like damage 1, 2. This would be the little knife. Damage 386 is the painful knife icon. Damage 7. Oh, that's a bit high. 7 to 10 is agonizing. Damage death is the gun icon. Other spawn is the spawn icon. You have things like status, and then you can do any of these status effects. There's field for shield, fire, and constricted. And then lastly, you have the slots. This is the targeting. Slots.self makes the effect target the effect caster. Slots.front targets the front opposing either enemy or party member. Slots.left targets the left opposing character. Slots.right would target the right opposing character. Slots.sides targets the allied characters on the left and right sides. The slots also dictate where the intent type shows up. But for now, I'm going to teach you how to spawn units with effects. So if you perhaps want to spawn an enemy, you would write this bit of code above where you want to put it in the ability, and then you would simply replace this entire scriptable object line with the name you've set it to here. And then to change the enemy you want to spawn, you would change the bit of text inside the load assets handle I got get in. And if I wanted to change the name of this, I would change this to like, I would have to change it here, I would have to change it here, and then I would change it wherever I'm inputting it. And then for characters, you use this effect, and then you can set the name here, and then similarly, you replace the entire scriptable object line. An important thing to note is that you should have the same number of effects as described here. For instance, it says 0 and 1, but the total is 2. And we have here 2 effects listed created. If you try to call a third effect by using base Ability.Effects2, it will give you an error when you are trying to load your character in, something along the lines of index out of range exception, and that's because 2 would be technically the third effect, but there is no third effect. To give the ability animations, you can use .visuals and then .animationTarget. This is one method of doing it where you get the enemy, you can get an enemy, and then you can get its abilities, and then from the list of abilities, you pick which one. Note that computers start counting at 0, so it'd be 0, 1, 2 if they had 3 abilities, and then you would select the one you want to use, and then get .ability.visuals from that. Animation target is simply where the animation plays, similarly to here, where you can target where the effect occurs. And to actually set this as a slap replacement, that's what a base ability is. Sorry if that wasn't clear. You would copy this line of code. You set the character's base ability as the ability. So you could technically make a new ability, but usually you want it to have actual substance, so you would do it like this. To make normal abilities, it's a similar manner where you do things like this. I think I will teach you about other things. So there are some stuff that damage effect doesn't need any extra details, but the spawn enemies and spawn characters do need extra details. A lot of effects use extra details to make them more specific. For instance, the remove status effect by default removes curse, but you can change the status to move to any status effect. So I have it set to frail, but you could do it to dot ruptured, you can have dot linked, focused, any of these things here. And then the exit value heal. The heal effect, if you do not use this, if you just do this, it would heal only the set value that you use as the entry variable. If you let it use .use previous exit value true, you can do things like deal 5 damage, and then based on the amount of damage that's actually dealt, you can heal, or you can remove all frail, and if they had 2 frail, and then you use the previous exit value, and you could heal 2. As seen here, this effect will remove all frail from the target. And then for each frail that was removed, for instance, if the target had 3 frail and you removed all 3, this exit value will heal 3 times the exit value, which would be 9. And then this last line here applies 2 frail to the target. And you can apply status effects various ways. Most you can apply them like apply cursed effect, apply ruptured effect. Most status effect applications effects follow similar naming formats, so I'm gonna leave it at frail effect for now. And then this is the other way you can get visuals, is if you use get enemy ability, if it's an enemy ability, or if it's character ability, you get character ability, and then the actual ability name, and then .visuals. Now, if you want to, say you've made an ability for like level 0, and you want to make a similar ability for level 1, but you want to change like 2 things in it, then what you can do is .duplicate, where you can do ability, like here, ability test 2 is test1.duplicate, and this basically, this line here makes a new ability called test 2 that is basically test 1. The only difference is that its internal name is test 2 and not test 1. And then from here you can change the name, you can change the description, you can also change the cost of an ability between levels. For instance, level 1 here, cost of pigments blue yellow, level 2 cost blue, and then split pigment. To write split pigments, you do pigments.split pigment, and then you would simply do the 2 pigments that you want to create a split of. For instance, pigments.yellow, it's not a dot, and that would create a split pigment between blue and yellow. And then if you only wanted to change the entry variables of the effects here, you can change them like this, where you get the effect number, and then you set its dot entry variable to whatever number you want. You can change a bunch of other things too. You can change the intent to be something like, see, normally it's status frail, but if I wanted to, I could change this to intent types dot damage, and that would change it between the levels. You can change the targeting through target, and I can make it target slots dot left right, for instance. Or you could change the effect of it and make it, instead of being an apply frail effect, you could change it to you could make it a apply ruptured effect at different levels if you wanted to. You can change a lot of things like that. And then since this character has 3 levels, I will copy over the 3rd ability. So here, if I made this copy level 1, I would have to change the cost again to be what this is. But if I make this duplicate level 2, then I don't need to change the cost again, since it's already a duplicate of level 2. The other way to... Oh, we'll get to that later. Yeah, but to do indirect damage is built into the damage effect. See, if you normally just call the damage effect with this, it would be direct damage. If you want to make it indirect, you have to do something like this and set .indirect to true, and then you can use it there to replace the scriptable object line. And yeah, this is to get character abilities from the videos, from the character's name, you have to, it's a little bit different from the get enemy ability. From the get enemy here, you need to get the rank, and then from the rank, the abilities within the rank, and then Ability.Visuals. So it's a little more complex, but not too complex. And yeah, you can change intent types and entry variables simply by doing this. So I'm gonna copy these over so that we have 3 versions of the ability, 1 for each role. Most characters have 4. This one only has 3 for simplification purposes. To do things with the... that's right, I need to... So, there is an exit value I have told you about, where you can collect it from... Most effects spit out an exit value. Damage will add up the total damage that it dealt and then spit that out as an exit value. Apply status effects will pretty much return the entry value of the status effects applied. Heal effects will return the amount healed, or they'll return a little less than the entry variable if the character reached max HP and there was still healing left over since they can't be healed higher than their max. It may also return 0 if the target is cursed or dying. But to set the exit value, there is a base effect for setting exit value, but I don't remember what it is. So instead I'm going to teach you how to make custom effects. This one is custom written, by the way. So for now I'm gonna go create. From here I type this out and then I can right click it and then go to definition. From here I can copy the entire definition. And this is the internal code for the damage effect. And if I wanted to, but we don't want a damage effect, we just want something to set the exit value. So I'm just gonna remove all of this. When making a custom effect, the first thing you want to do is probably want to change the name. But the effect, what it needs is 2 things. The first thing it needs you to do is it needs you to set the exit amount, and this is equivalent to the exit value. For now I'm going to set this to entry variable, which is the entry variable, for instance, like here or here. And then the next thing it needs you to do is it needs you to return a value of either true or false. So for this one I'm going to turn true. And there, that is the exit value setter effect. That's how you make it. So this here would set the exit value to 0. And if you want an ability to have no intent type, you can just simply set it as null for the intent. However, this will still pop up a black box when you are hovering over the ability. So you usually need to mask it with other things. For instance, I have this one doing status ruptured, slots left, right. Now, to make an effect that does random amounts of something between the exit value and the entry variable, this is a little different. But here we want it to apply 0 to 5 ruptured to the left and right. So we've already gotten the exit value here set to 0, and then the entry value is here is 5. So the ruptured status, the apply ruptured effect does not internally have a method for, it doesn't have any bools here that you can set to make it apply random ranges between the exit values. So what you would need to do is you would paste it here, random ruptured random exit value to entry, and then from here, if you've copied something over and it's giving you red errors on things, this one says ambiguous reference between Unity Engine and system. Usually you can just put Unity Engine in front of it, because generally that's the one you want anyway. So to make it apply random values, you can see here this is the part entry variable, entry variable, entry variable. These are the parts where it would apply 5. So if you want it to make a random amount, then you would simply do something like int apply num equals unity engine.random.range. And random range is a function between two numbers where it'll include the first number. So if I set this to 0, 5, it would include the first number and then exclude the second, so it'd hit 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and it would be a random between that. So if you wanted to make it a random between the previous exit value and the entry variable, what you would do is, for the first number, you would do base.previous exit value. This is the int of the exit value. And then for the second number, you would simply put entry variable +1, since it would exclude the +1 and simply hit up to the entry variable. And then from here, you would copy this number into here, here, and here every time it applies the effect. And then similarly, we would have to copy it down here. The difference between this and down here is this is just one target. This will make it only apply to one target randomly from the list of targets given to the effect via, for instance, slots left, right. Generally that doesn't get used though, so, but we would do the same thing here, here, and here. Also, you would want to do it, you would want to set this random number inside the for each statement. What this bit does is, this is a for statement. It sets a number I to 0, and then it checks if I is less than targets.length, which is the amount, which would be the amount of targets. And then if it is, it runs this and then increases I by 1. So here, this would be targets I, and it would start at 0, and then it would go to 1 after this, and then it would go to 2, and then it would keep going up unless I becomes equal to or greater than the amount of targets in the list. Though that wouldn't cause any issues, you'd still hit every target because computers count 0, 1, 2, despite the length being 3. So once it reaches 3, you'd have gotten to the 4th unit, which would have been wrong. You want to make it call the random within this for loop, because if you moved it outside of it, for instance, if you put it here, it would only pick one random number, say, like between 0 and 5, it picked 3, and it would apply 3 to every target. If you put it inside here, it would apply, say, 3 to the first one, 5 to the second one, 1 to the third one, and so on and so forth. Yeah, making custom effects usually just involves tampering with existing effects. And then from here, we can just use that since it's there. The other way to make abilities is you can just copy the code. You don't have to .duplicate. You can, because it basically does the same thing. You just copy the code and make a new ability. Though, if you're going to do that, one of the important things to remember is to have all of the modification, all the names here, to be set the same. For instance, if I made this, but had the dot effects to like toss 1, which is this ability, instead of toss 2, if I tried to use toss 2 in combat, it would wait lock me, in that it would make you wait, because it's trying to perform an ability, but it ran into an error, so it would just stop, and you would basically be soft locked. Not good. So you want to make sure that the naming is consistent for your ability. Also, one thing to note is that if you attempt to get a boss character's move through this method, it doesn't seem to work, so you do have to use get enemy, boss name, ability, etc. this manner. And Heaven's Gate red underscore boss is simply the red incarnate. Some of them are named weirdly. And then I'll just copy over the third one to get the goals. And one of the useful things about simply copying abilities instead of using .duplicate is you can a lot more easily just add extra effects. See, if I use .duplicate, I would have to reset the effects to be new effects too if I wanted to make it have 2 effects, since you can't just add extra effects like that. And if you do new effect, you have to reset each effect. It's slightly tedious. But if you're copying them over like this, then you can simply change this one number and then add a new effect. It's slightly faster. For instance, so between levels 2 and 3, level 3 will apply 1 scar to the center, while level 2 will not. And then if you're going to change the targeting, one thing to remember is that you should probably also change the animation target. And then stored values. So stored values are things like Arnold's pep talk. It increases his punch and his heal. Or Burnout's moves. Those are stored values going in a negative direction to decrease his damage. So to make unique stored values display, you need to, underneath the void, not inside of this add, but underneath it, you need to copy this bit here. You need to change this to be the unique stored value you want to use. For instance, if I wanted to use stored value like that, there. Generally, for similar reasons for entity IDs, you want to have stored values at pretty high numbers so that you don't accidentally overlap with someone else's stored value. Within the code here, if the value is less than or equal to 0, it displays nothing. If you want your stored value to be negative, then you might change this to be greater than or equal to 0. If you want to select decrease, for instance, but since this one will be increasing, we will not. And then here, you can change this to be the whatever you want. So I could make this like heal instead of damage. And then this displays the actual number of the stored value. This bit here is the number. Everything before that is simply text. Or I could make it, yeah, just do it like that. So yeah. Important thing to do is if you're adding 2 strings, you do need to place a space in between them in one of the strings, otherwise they always stuck together. these two bits set the color, and from here you can change this. Negative SD color is set to color.red, but you can also change it to positive SD color, which is, I believe, the color blue. But you can also change it to any color you want by using color.green, for instance, or color.black. Or if you want blue again, you can use violet. Is violet not an option? That's unfortunate. But you can use pretty much every color there. We will use self.positive color because it's easier. And then we're not done yet. We need to make it needs to be pretty much this format. And then after this, we need to get this line here. This needs to be placed within our void add. This is the name of the ID tour. It doesn't really matter. You can set this to whatever you want. This is the important part. For stored value displays, you want this first parameter to be exactly like this. And then for the second parameter, you want the method name to be whatever method you are, whatever the name of your stored value display string. This one is add stored value name, so stored value name. And then this is the important part. You need to make sure this is the correct class. For instance, the class of this is called main, so we would change this here, type of class. And that is basically how to display stored values. To use stored values, there are built-in things for instance, this is the default stored value changing effect. You can set .increase to true or false, and then you set the value name to whatever value you're using. For instance, we're using 29371, so we would change that here to be equivalent to the one we want to use. To use stored values beyond it, there are some default things for using stored values to damage or to heal, but we're gonna write a custom effect for it. So we can make an effect that will heal by stored values, or I suppose we'll rewrite it since something already exists for it. This is the heal effect. It is shorter than the life ruptured effect. Heal effect, for instance, has a use previous X value. This here is a for each statement. So for each target in the list of targets we have, if the target represents the slot on the ground, by the way. So if the target has a unit in it, it'll heal the unit, the number, like this. This is the heal effect. So this line here specifically is what heals the target. Unit.heal. So if we wanted to make this number set to our unit stored variable, what we can do is int num equals, and then to get the stored value, hang on. So if we just want to use the stored value, this specific stored value for this one effect, we can use int num equals caster, and that's the unit that's casting the ability dot get stored value, and this returns the number within the stored value, this line here. and then num is equivalent to the stored values number, and we are healing by that number. But if you want to say set the number specific, the stored value number specific to whatever you want through a method like this or like this, what you can do is you can create public unit stored value names, and then we can name it stored value, and then we can set stored value here. So it gets the stored value that you're gonna give it, and then use that. So from here we can get this, and here we can write and from here, what's the issue? Oh, there must be another thing named this, so within the base game's code. That's one of the reasons why you want to make the names rather specific. And then from here we go heal store val dot, and then we can get stored value. This is the value we created. We can set it equal to the value we want it to be equal. For instance, this. We could also change it to anything else if we wanted to, but for now, leave it like that. So then, next thing would be targeting random. So within the apply ruptured effect, this is more or less, this part more or less exists from the base. They have this just one target, which targets a random unit from within the list of targets that it was given, instead of just applying it to all of them. So maybe we want an ability that heals a random target, and that can be done pretty simply. We would do something like for each target slot info and targets, we would, well, first thing we would do is we would create a list of target slot info we would set the list, and then for each of the targets, if target slot info dot has unit, we would add it to the list. And then we need to, first we need to do is we need to make a check. Is if target list dot count is less than or equal to 0, we need to return false, because if you try to get a unity range of 0 to 0, it can cause issues. And the next thing you want to do is int selection, target slot info specific target equals, and then we can do target list unity engine dot random dot range 0 target list dot count. and this will select a random number from 0 to 1 minus the target list, 1 minus the length of the list, and then it will grab the target in that position within the list. Similar to how effects run 0, 1, 2, the target list would also run 0, 1, 2. And then we can get a random target from the list of targets that has that. And then if we only want to heal that one random target, we would simply take that out here, and we would replace all the instances of target slot info with specific target there. And that will heal a random from the selected targets. Oh, I need to show you the hard way of doing targeting. So, the slots.slot thing does not have every combination of slots. It doesn't have far left and far right things. So what you can do is, if you want to target specific slots, you can write something like this, Slots.SlotTarget. So if I wanted to target left and right, for instance, using this, I would do Slots.SlotTarget, new int, and then would set the targeting. 0 would be the caster's position. -1 is 1 to the left, 1 is 1 to the right, and then you need a true or false to determine whether it's allies or enemies you're targeting, so we'd put false to target enemies. If you wanted to target the left, right, and the far right, you would put -1, 1, 2. If you wanted to target allies, you would do that, but we're not targeting allies. And then 0 would be the front, but we're not going to target it, so. Okay, so one thing about effects is that it can be effects and abilities. If you target a random character within an ability, you can't get that random slot outside of that effect. So if you wanted to set the animation target to something else, you'd have to write that inside this effect that gets the specific random target. So for now, I'm gonna remove this thing to return this to normal, because what I will do is I will show you how to make a custom effect that will run several effects on a random target. This one. So what this does is it runs an effect and an animation on a target. So all of this bit here, no, this whole bit here, well, this bit. This creates a list of targets. This gets this list of targets given, and if the target has a unit, it'll add it to the second list. And then if the second list does not have anything in it, it returns false. And then it'll grab, returning, by the way, means it just quits right there. So if it's going to return up here, none of this down here gets run. And then int slot num specific target dot slot ID gets the ID of the slot, and that's important for this. Generic targeting by slot index. This replaces an effect where you would normally put slots.self, for instance. You could replace it with generic targeting by slot index if you want to target one specific slot on the board regardless of the character's position. So you could target. So the thing set would be slot pointer directions. You would set, if you wanted to get the farthest left slot, you would set this to 0, for instance. 4 would be the farthest right, and then it goes chronologically 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 for each of the 5 slots. For this, we want to target this one target's specific ID, and then this dot get allies is simply whether or not it targets allies or enemies. So if you want to set this in code, one thing you can do is you can set it to check to see if the slots is target character slot is equivalent to the caster's unit character. This is a bool that checks whether or not they're on the player side of the field. So if they are on the player side of the field, it'll return true. And if true equals true, it is getting allies. And if false equals false, it'll get allies. But if true equals false or the other way around, it will get enemies instead. And then there's the AnimationVisualsEffect. This is how you run animations as an effect. You can simply do things like this. .visuals can be loaded assets handler .getAbility.visuals. But for now, I've set it to be an input visuals that you can set on your own. And the target here we've set to the random target we've picked. And then this line here runs effects. So for instance, it makes the caster perform extra effects. So for instance, if I wanted to make the caster damage someone in front, I would do new effect, object.create instance, damage effect. And then we'll do 1. You don't have to set intent types for these since you can't hover over this. This is just forcing it to run effect immediately. Normally you wouldn't see the intent types for these. Null, and then slots.front. And then it takes this effect and then just forces the caster to run it. So it's a very neat way to get things run additionally. So what this line in this specific custom effect does is it runs 2 effects. The first one is it runs this effect animation, which takes the animation visuals effect here that we've created. The animation visuals effect does not do anything with the entry variable number, so you can set that to whatever you want. But it takes this effect and it runs it. This targeting doesn't matter either since it has its own unique target for the animation. And then the second effect it runs this effect up here that you can add to the thing, and then runs it on the target that we've gotten here. So this just runs a visuals and effect on a random target. And I would encourage you to like tinker with these custom effects instead of just copying them from other people. It does help you in the long run if you learn how to write them. And then, as you can see, we've set the exit amount up here to 0, and we are returning true at the end, and that's why it's not giving us errors. So, to actually run this, what we would do is get this up here, and I'm going to put this here. And the effect to run, we're setting it to do this And because we're replacing the entry amount with the stored value, this doesn't run. And because we're going to change the targeting down here, we're going to change the target. This doesn't matter either. And then we're going to set the animation visuals to be weave 1A, which is the internal name for Hans's level 1 weave. And then I need to change the name of it. Maybe that. And then, so this effect picks a random target from the targets it's given. So if we want it to target all allies except self, for instance, we can do several things. We can do Slots.SlotTarget, and then we can do new int. There are only 9 possible positions you can target due to the size of the grid, and that would be -4, -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. True, because we want it to target allies. If we want this to not target the caster and just target everyone else, we can just set it to not include 0. But another thing we can do is targeting by unit size. This also would replace the Slots.SlotTarget. And from here we can make it, we can change get allies. If you set this to false, it gets enemies. Get all unit slots gets every single slot on the field. If you set this to false, it'll only grab slots with units in them. Additionally, this is helpful if you want to target like enemies, because if the enemy takes up more than one tile, if you use this method, it'll hit that enemy twice, whereas if you use this method, it'll only hit that enemy once. And then ignore cast slot simply ignores the slot that it is cast from. So we can use this to replace this slot target function. And then since we're already making it run an animation in here, we don't need it to run another animation, so we can set this to null, and then it just won't do anything. Oh yes, and when you are writing descriptions, if you want to make a line break, like if you want to enter in the description, you can use this function, /n, to create a new line. Very helpful in terms of clarity. Then we'll just copy these over. And now we've got 4 separate abilities that all level up. 4 happens to be more than 3, which is the normal amount of character abilities. So in the menu screen, unfortunately, we will only have 3 options due to how it works. So there will be... This will cause issues, basically. So what we can do instead is we can make the character start with all abilities. Sort of how Mung has all of their abilities, and Gospel and Mordrake have all of their abilities. We can do template fool dot uses all abilities equals true. Additionally, if you want to remove slap from the fool, and you don't want to like replace it, you can just do uses base ability. You can set it to true, or you could also set it to false. Oh, I spelled that wrong. It's uses base ability, yeah. And then to add levels, you do template fool dot add level. The first number here is the health for the level. So if I set this to like 10, they'd start with 10 health. They could have 12 health at level 2. It doesn't matter what number you set these to. You could set this to like 55. You could even make it decrease with levels. It wouldn't do anything different. It would just run it normally. Next important thing is the last number, which is the number of the level. A character with 4 levels would have 0, 1, 2, 3. This character has only 3, so we're only using 0, 1, 2. And then this is all the abilities. We do new ability list, or new ability array, my bad. And then you would, within these brackets, set all the abilities you want to use. We've created 4 abilities, each with 3 variants, 1 for each level. So we do 4 abilities level 1, 4 abilities level 2, 4 abilities 3. You just write the name of the ability inside the array. And then, yeah, you've added 3 levels like that. And then at the very bottom, you would just add character. Now, this doesn't actually add the character. This adds the character whenever this function add is called. So if we want that to get called, what you have to do is call it inside the awake function, as this function always gets called whenever the game loads up. So we can simply do main.add, no, just add, no, just add. Why is it? That's weird. Oh, maybe it needs to be static. That's probably it. Yeah, my bad. If you're making public voids, they would need to be instantiated. If you just want to call a void like this, it needs to be static. So, it needs to be public static void add. That was my bad. Then if you want to add multiple characters, what you can do is you can copy this, for instance, make a second add, name it something else, like to add, wait, no, other add, and then you would just change the ID to be a different number, and then you've got a second character. Or what you can do is you could create a public static class and call it like other fool, and then within it make another public static void add and add a character in there, and then within here we've added main.add. You could also add other fool.add, and then you've got 2 fools added. Or you could add them all in the same void here. You could write another character, but I would recommend not doing that because that will get very cluttered very fast. We have here template fool, which is the exact same thing with just a different ID, basically. And so we could do template.add. And that's basically how you make characters. That's how you... Oh, I forgot. Extra character sprite changing. So Noak has an extra sprite when he gets focused, where he flips around and he's got his shards tucked in. Griffin has an extra sprite for having spotlight. Cranes has several extra sprites for taking damage. So if you want to do something like that, you would get this. you would make something like this. You can name it whatever you want. You can set these numbers to whatever you want, but would recommend doing something pretty high, to not overlap with base game stuff and to not overlap with anyone else's. Though this doesn't cause problems if they overlap, it would just the character sprites might change when you don't want them to. And then you can set a list of front sprites and a list of back sprites. If you only want it to have one extra sprite, you would set this to like 1 and then just cut all those out. I have them set to 3 here. It is important to have the number of front sprites and back sprites be the same, otherwise funky things might happen. Index out of range exception, you have 3 objects but only list 2 up here. Yeah. Yeah, you can just set them like this. And then you would grab the sprites similar to how you grab this. In order to set this extra sprites array as the character's extra sprites, you would use this little line here. Set template full.extra sprites equals extra sprites to change them, you would create effects like this, sort of like the stored value increase effect. You have to set the specific extra sprite type that you want it to change. For instance, extra sprite change uses the same sprite type as use special from this extra sprites array that is attached to the character. And then default sprite change uses the same use default type that is attached to the character. And then custom passives time. Custom passives look a little daunting. They're not too complex. This line here makes a new passive. You can set the name, the passive icon sprite. Icon sprites are 32 by 32. You can set the type. If you're making like a variant of like the base game's passives, for instance, like skittish, you can do passive ability types dot like skittish or dot decay, etc. But if you just want like to make a custom passive, I would recommend just using custom ability sprite type. A custom passive type, not sprite, and just a number. You can set the description for when it's on enemies and the description for when it's on characters to be different. For instance, if you want to use like phrasing like this character does things and then this enemy does things when it's on enemies. This does passive trigger information panel. It simply triggers whether or not it'll display text upon triggering. For instance, at the end of the turn, the Music Men, the word skittish pops up, and then they do the effects of skittish. If I set this to true, it would do draw every time this triggers. If I set this to false, it just wouldn't. The trigger on is simply the trigger call. There are a lot of trigger calls. You set them like this, passive.trigger call. This one is on ability used. I could make it trigger on 2 separate triggers. For instance, I could do on ability use and trigger calls dot on death or something. The list of trigger calls, if you right click trigger calls and go to definition, you can get this whole list. This is all the trigger calls in the base game. All of these get used except count. Count is a very specific trigger call. If you set the trigger calls to count, it will not trigger. Because it will specifically not add listeners on count. Because for 1, count never gets triggered. For 2, it specifically is written to ignore count. But yeah, there's all these trigger calls. There's on moved, can heal, on will apply damage, on apply spotlight, can die, on overflow added, on any ability used. There's a bunch of things. And then for the actual effects, we do passive.effects equals extension methods dot to effect info array new effect, and then you technically don't need that number, but there's one effect here, so we have it one. And we have a new effect. We are doing what this does is it does the extra sprites change that we've defined up here to make it change from normal front sprite to 1, 2, 3, or with front sprites and back sprites. This is a passive. Generally, in passives, you cannot show the intent type. You can make it intents null via this method too, though it's not necessary. You can just do null. Extra sprites change, I do not believe takes an entry variable, so you can set that number to whatever you want. Yeah, it only changes once regardless, so the entry variable doesn't matter. And then Conditions.Chance 50. So this is the condition of an effect, the dot underscore condition. There are several things. Conditions.Chance 50, what this does is it basically rolls Unity Engine 0 to 100. If it's less than 50, it'll trigger. If I change this to 30, if it was less than 30, it would trigger this. If it was more than 30, it would not trigger this. We'll set it back to 50. There are other conditions. One very helpful condition is the previous effect condition, and then did that. And then you set this to was successful equals true. But this does, if you replaced this with did that, what it would do is if the previous condition returned true, it'll run the effect, but if it returned false, it wouldn't. If you set this to false, on the other hand, if it returned the previous effect returned true, it wouldn't run, but if it returned false, it would run. And you can change this specific number, did that dot previous amount. You can set this to the amount of effect you want to go back. I believe it defaults to 1, but if you made it 2, it would check 2 effects ago. If you made it 3, it would check 3 effects ago, etc. To add passives to a character, you do something like this. You just do dot passives equals new base passive ability, and you open brackets. So passive here refers to this passive we've made. But also, Brutal API does have several built-in passives for like the normal passives. There's Withering, for instance. There's also Skittish, Unstable, Slippery. Overexert, it gets the overexert from the chordophones, which is, I believe, overexert 1. Multi-attack gets it from the chordophones, which is multi-attack 3. Constricting, formless. Overexert, multi-attack, and formless, I should add, do not work on party members. Neither does forgetful. Obscured doesn't do anything. We have confusion, dying, and animate. Inferno gets it from Dimitri. So since enemies start their turn every time they perform an ability, it works a bit differently on enemies. It's kind of bugged. We have Enfeebled, Immortal, Two-Faced. Two-Faced gets it specifically red-blue Two-Faced, so if you wanted a different color Two-Faced, you'd have to make something custom. Catalyst, Anchored. Anchored works on party members, in case you didn't know. Delicate, Flaky, Transfusion. Abomination in Brutal API is currently bugged. It does not get Abomination, but instead gets multi-attack 2. Infestation, I believe, gets Infestation 1 from, like, Geckos, I think. Masochism does not work on party members. Fleeting Decay. I'm not sure which decay it gets, but if you wanted to specifically make it decay, you'd have to make something custom. I believe this specific decay decays enemies. If you wanted to make party members decay into other party members, you would have to use the copy and spawn custom character effect. And then just make a new passive for that. I think that's everything now. Yeah. This was gonna be simple, and then I was like, custom effects, because I'm an addict, so now it's not simple. My bad. That's basically it. Yeah. Remember this, how you had... Yeah. Okay, bye.